Hello, and welcome to an Eastern Roman History Maiorianus collaboration. The long reign of Theodosius II, Emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, was generally very peaceful. It was a time of cultural development, legal innovation, significant economic expansion, as well as religious and social change. Militarily, there had been two minor conflicts with the Persian Empire, but generally there was peace and cooperation between the two embattled empires. The Eastern Roman Empire had rendered significant aid to the declining Western Roman Empire, ruled by Emperor Valentinian III and his Magister Militum Aetius. The main threat to Theodosius II's empire were the steppe hordes beyond the Danube. The Huns, led by King Rua, had already struck terror in the Balkans in the 430s. In 435, Rua the Hun died and his sons Attila and Bleda became joint kings, restoring peace. Theodosius II provided for the defense of the Black Sea by making it a capital offense to offer shipbuilding knowledge to the northern barbarians. The banks of the Danube were defended by two large field armies, the army of Thrace and the army of Illyricum. Local defences were concentrated along the Danube River, with the provinces of Scythia, Moesia Prima, Moesia Secunda, and Dacia Ripensis under their duces and limitani. The Danube River fleet guarded the banks of Roman Thrace. Constantinople now sported sea walls to make its defences even more impenetrable. However, the calm that lay over the Eastern Roman Empire was disturbed and annihilated in the 440s by Attila the Hun. Welcome to this collaboration between Eastern Roman history and Maiorianus. This is the first video of a collaborative effort with the fantastic channel Maiorianus, who covers the late Roman Empire and some of the big questions concerning that period. You can go over to his channel to watch the second part to this video about Attila the Hun and his invasions of Gaul and Italy. I strongly encourage you to head over to his channel and subscribe to it for his many thought-provoking videos. Also, I would like to thank my generous patrons for their support, and if you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe for more content about the late Roman and Byzantine Empire. Stay notified using the bell, and now let us continue. In 441, Theodosius II had organised a joint expedition with Aetius to retake Africa from the Vandals. When they reached Sicily, the Huns broke through the defences on the Danube. Attila crossed the Danube at the junction between it and the Morava Valley, near Singidunum. They rapidly occupied and sacked the city of Viminacium. The city was left utterly ruined. Its population, those who had not been killed, were led off into slavery, and it was thoroughly pillaged. His forces then moved to Margus, which, despite being surrendered by its bishop, suffered the same fate. Then the fort of Constantia was destroyed. Then Attila destroyed the city of Singidunum. Lastly, Sirmium was left in ruins. Apremius, the Praetorian prefect of Illyricum, moved the capital of the prefecture from Sirmium to Thessalonica. The Magister Militum Aspar managed to arrange a one-year truce with Attila. As described, one of the advantages the Huns had was their ability to successfully siege Roman fortifications by assault. This was something that many other barbarian kingdoms struggled with. For example, Alaric's Visigoths only took Rome because someone let them in, not because he breached the Roman defences, which had bested him in two previous sieges. The apparent absence of any sort of challenge to Attila's shocking invasion was because Roman forces had been deployed to Sicily. Both Aetius and Theodosius II had mustered considerable forces to destroy the Vandals, for they had seized Carthage in 439. In 440, Persia invaded Armenia, thus it took time for the army to be redeployed. Ultimately, the Romans' reliance on their fortresses for defence was exploited by Attila and his advanced siegecraft. Once the truce was over, Attila demanded the fulfillment of the 435 treaty. that the Romans would return all of their Hunnish fugitives, and that the Romans would pay an annual tribute in gold. Theodosius II refused to hand back the fugitives, but was willing to negotiate more equitable terms. Attila struck again. He immediately besieged and sacked Retaria, which was the headquarters of the Danube fleet. However, some places resisted, such as Asimus in Moesia Prima, whose local population and garrison drove off their Hunnish besiegers. Attila then proceeded to Nisus. Priscus of Panium, a contemporary imperial diplomat, reported in his Fragmentary history. The Scythians were besieging Nisus, an Illyrian city on the Danube River, now seeing how they intended to take this well-populated, and more to the point, well-fortified city. The barbarians advanced with every attempt. As the town's inhabitants lacked the courage for going out to battle, the barbarians bridged the river to the southern side, just where it flows past the city, so that a large number could easily cross. At this spot, they brought machines up to the city wall. First, since the approach was easy, they brought up beams laid on wheels. Men standing on the beams shot arrows at the defenders on the ramparts. Other men stationed at each of the two ends pushed the wheels with their feet and brought the machines up to where they were needed to make it possible to shoot with good aim through the embrasures in the coverings. For the machines were covered with braided chase tree whips, which held hides and leather as a protection against whatever fire-bearing missiles or other projectiles were launched against them. The battle was thus without danger for the men on the beam, for many similar engines had also been constructed for use against the city. Scores of their projectiles caused the rampart defenders to give up and retreat. Now the machines called rams were also brought up. This machine, also very large, consisted of a beam hanging down by slack chains from wooden posts inclining towards each other. It had spearheads and protective coverings on the way already described to ensure the operator's safety. From the rear, men vigorously drew back the beam with small cords at a spot opposite their target, and then let it go so that, by its force, the whole part of the wall would collapse and disappear. The defenders on the walls were throwing stones, large as wagons, which had already been prepared for this purpose whenever the engines were brought up to the city wall. They crushed one machine together with its men, but they were no match for the whole number of them. In fact, the attackers also brought up ladders. Here the wall lay destroyed by the rams. There the defenders on the ramparts were overwhelmed by the number of machines. And so the city was taken, with the barbarians gaining access through the part of the wall shattered by the ram's blow, and also via the ladders that were brought up to the parts of the wall not yet failing. Aspar and Ariobindus had deployed their army in eastern Thrace, but when they engaged Attila, their campaign ended in defeat, with him outmaneuvering them and besting them after several battles. The Huns pursued the Eastern Roman army into Gallipoli and enveloped the outskirts of Constantinople, taking a fort called Athiras, and then Attila defeated the army again. Theodosius II had tried and failed to contain Attila, and Priscus reports that his generals urged Theodosius to make peace out of fear of Attila. They could not defeat him on the battlefield. Rather than risk the Huns advancing on the capital, Theodosius decided to come to terms. Attila demanded the emperor return the fugitives, that he should pay 2,100 pounds of gold per year in tribute to the Huns, roughly 151,200 gold solidi. In addition, Attila demanded 6,000 pounds of gold in payment in arrears, roughly 432,000 gold solidi. Lastly, any POWs who had escaped without ransom were to be fined 12 solidi per person. Those that could not pay were expected to return them. The Romans were once again expected to refuse entry to barbarian fugitives. The extortions were enormous, and Priscus once again had this to say. As for the agreements and the money owed to the Huns, the Romans compelled everyone to contribute who paid taxes towards tribute payments, as well as those who had at any time been relieved of the burdensome property taxes, whether through judges' decision or emperor's generosity. Men registered in the Senate on account of their wealth also contributed promised gold. For many of them, the illustrious circumstances of their lives changed. They suffered humiliation in having to pay what the emperor's appointed assessors held them liable for. Once prosperous men were setting out their wives' jewellery and their furniture in the marketplace. So much adversity awaited the Romans after the war that many men gave up their lives, either by starving or by hanging. But as soon as the treasury had been emptied, Scotas arrived. The gold and the fugitives were sent. When many of the fugitives refused to comply with the surrender, the Romans killed them. Among them were some royal Scythians who had come to the Romans after they had refused to be marshalled under Attila. The crushing tribute could be afforded by the Eastern Roman Empire, since most senators made at least £1,000 of gold per year. Peace had to be afforded. In 445, Attila murdered his brother Bleda and expanded his confederation of barbarians. Meanwhile, Theodosius II failed to detach the Akadziri from the Hunnish confederation. In 446, fugitives fled to the Eastern Roman Empire, and the emperor refused to hand them over to the Huns. In spring 447, Attila responded by invading again. Attila's second invasion included many of the peoples he had subjugated during the 440s, such as the Ostrogoths and Gepids, making his forces even fiercer than before. The Roman comitatenses mustered at Marcianople were commanded by Arnagisclus. To everyone's horror, on the 26th of January 447, an earthquake damaged the Theodosian wall of Constantinople and toppled 57 towers. The prefect of the city, Constantius, had the walls repaired in record time. These earthquakes and floods racked Thrace and the rest of the lands of the Aegean Sea and continued for 4 months. Theodosius led a barefoot procession through Constantinople to atone, for it was in the Christian understanding of this time that God caused earthquakes because he was displeased with man's wickedness. Zeno the Isaurian, the Magister Militum per Orientem, reached Constantinople with a detachment of troops, reinforcing the vulnerable capital. He was rewarded with a consulship the following year. Pillaging his way eastward, Arnagisclus led the army against Attila in a massive clash at the Battle of the Utus River. Jordanes reports, against Arnagisclus, Magister Militum of Moesia, leaving Marcianopolis, fought valiantly, and with his horse falling under him, was surrounded, and even so, not ceasing to fight, was killed. And Count Marcellinus says, Amigiscius, the master of the soldiery, fought bravely in Dacia Ripensis, alongside the Utum River, and was killed by King Attila, when most of the enemy had been destroyed. There are few other details, but although it was a clear Roman defeat, Attila had come away with a bloody nose. Attila then burned his way through Greece to Thermopylae. Local forces managed to stop Attila from advancing further into Greece, and he pulled back. He then pillaged his way to Marcianopolis, and indeed, the only cities that were not sacked were Heraclea and Adrianople. Attila drew close to Constantinople, but decided against attacking the giant fortress. For the Roman people, Patriarch Nestorius reported that they had been worn out with pestilences and famines, failure of rains, and hail, and heat, and marvellous earthquakes, and captivity and fear, and flight, and all kinds of ills. Theodosius II, having tried everything, was forced to sue for peace with the Huns. After 447, Attila also managed to impose a brief demilitarization of the Danube frontier between Singidunum and Novae. The Balkan defences and most of its major cities had been destroyed. The provinces of Illyricum and Thrace lay in ruins. Theodosius II's attention was drawn to the Eutychian Schism in 448 to 449, leading to the Second Council of Ephesus in the latter year. In 449, Theodosius II's chief minister, the Cubicularius Chrysaphius, hatched a ruse to assassinate Attila the Hun in a diplomatic mission. The plan was approved by Theodosius II and his Magister Officiorum Martialis. Priscus, the historian, accompanied the diplomatic mission and even met Attila himself. The plot, however, failed, leading to Attila demanding the surrender of Chrysaphius. Chrysaphius, in reaching the peak of influence in the empire, had made many enemies and now they descended upon him. Zeno the Isaurian married a Roman noble lady, betrothed to a secretary of Attila's. When Attila complained to Theodosius II, the latter confiscated the girl's property, and Zeno the Isaurian blamed Chrysaphius for the act. The Magister Militum Anatolius and Nomus the patrician negotiated another betrothal for Attila's secretary to placate the Hunnish ruler, and even got the Huns to withdraw from the demilitarized zone along the Danube. Chrysaphius remained in power, but only because he still enjoyed the endorsement of Emperor Theodosius II. The emperor was cautious and worried about Zeno's power. He sent agents to have the general arrested on suspicion of proclaiming himself a usurper. However, no arrest was made. On the 28th of July, 450, Theodosius II was thrown from his horse while he was out riding, and died from the injury he sustained. He was 48 years old. Lacking a son, the Eastern Roman Empire needed to choose a new emperor. On the 25th of August, 450, the authorities in Constantinople eventually decided to proclaim the retired general Marcian as emperor. To connect him to the Theodosian dynasty, he married Theodosius II's sister, Pulcheria. Interestingly, Valentinian III did not accept Marcian as a legitimate emperor until 452, and had to be restrained by Aetius from marching against Constantinople. Chrysaphius did not survive long after Theodosius II's death. Marcian had him executed. Having wrung the Eastern Roman Empire dry of cash, Attila turned his attention to the Western Roman Empire and the new barbarian kingdoms there. For the invasions of Attila the Hun into Gaul and Italy, and how Emperor Valentinian III and Aetius overcame the Huns, please see Maiorianus' video in the accompanying part to this one. Attila the Hun's decision to refocus his attention allowed Marcian to change strategies. With Attila in the area, Theodosius II had had no choice but to placate the Scourge of God. Marcian refused to pay the Huns their tribute. The ambassadors sent by Attila upon his accession returned empty-handed. Similarly, Valentinian III refused to make Honoria Empress of the West, as demanded by Attila. Priscus reported, "If Attila remained peaceful, they said, they would give him gifts. If he threatened war, they would lead against him arms and men not inferior to his force." Attila's mind was divided, and he was unsure which side he would attack first. He decided it was best for now to turn his attention toward the Greater War and march against the West, in order to fight not only the Italians, but also the Goths and Franks. It was a calculated risk by Marcian, for Attila may have turned around and attacked the Balkans again. In 451, Marcian went on the offensive and sent raids against the Hunnish Confederation. In 452, Attila's invasion of Italy meant that there were only enough Huns to police their subject nations, including the Gepids and Ostrogoths. Marcian sent an army beyond the Danube. They engaged the Huns and routed them, winning the East's first major victory against them. It was a significant reason for why Attila abandoned his expedition into Italy. However, when Attila returned to reinforce the Hunnish homeland, he sent a letter to Marcian and promised to invade the Eastern Roman Empire to exact the tribute that Marcian had not sent. However, in 453, Attila the Hun died from a nosebleed during his wedding night. His death quickly saw the rapid disintegration of the Hunnish Confederation. In 454, the Gepids revolted and defeated the sons of Attila at the Battle of Nidau. After the battle, Hunnish authority was utterly broken. Some of the Huns and their confederates entered the Roman Empire and enlisted in the Roman army. In 454 to 455, Marcian settled two large groups of Ostrogoths, one in Valeria, led by Theodoric Strabo, and another in Pannonia Prima, led by Theodoric the Amal, as foederati. And thus, the terror of the Scourge of God, Attila the Hun, came to an end. And this has been Maiorianus and Eastern Roman history.